Good evening. We'd like to welcome you tonight to Brookside Baptist Church. We are so glad that you are here. We want to welcome you to this evening. We also want to welcome the Creation Science Society of Milwaukee, and we are so glad that you're here for this special presentation. And of course, the Bible teaches in Psalm 19 that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. You and I can see God every day. Number one, through his word. He's declared himself there, but we can also see him through what he has created. And tonight you have the opportunity to be challenged from both and be able to see God's great handiwork in creation. And so I'd like to invite you to join me in prayer after I'm done praying. Ken Cartman, the president of the Creation Science Society of Milwaukee, will come and also give you a greeting. Join me as we open up our service with prayer. Father, when we think of this world that you have placed us in, we are so thankful that you have clearly displayed your greatness, your glory, and your goodness throughout it. But Father, you didn't leave us simply with your creation. You sent your own Son to die for us. And Father, as we come and listen, I ask that you would clearly put on display your handiwork. And would you allow us not simply to see your work, but help us to see your Son and yourself. And may you challenge us tonight through this entire evening. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Brother Ken.
Hello, and on behalf of the Creation Science Society of Milwaukee, I would like to welcome each of you to the evening tonight in the presentation by Mr. Jerry Frye. We have been honored to have Jerry speak with us in the past, and have always enjoyed his presentations, and I'm positive that you will as well. Also, I'm very thankful for Brookside Baptist Church for putting on this event. Again, they have done it in the past for us as well, and it's always a fantastic turnout and a great presentation and a great way to honor our Lord in his creation. For those of you who may not be very familiar with the Creation Science Society of Milwaukee, we are an organization who puts on creation presentations on a monthly basis. However, this will be our last one until through the summer. We'll begin again in late August or September yet, and pick it back up again at that time. But we put on a presentation with various speakers throughout the school year at locations around the metro Milwaukee area. So if you would like to stop by our bookstore out in the front, you'll see that we have literature. Hopefully each of you got one of our brochures. There is a website on there that we have the events that are upcoming. We have resources such as online streaming videos with other people's presentations and so on. Very interesting resource for biblical creation. So it's good to see you all here again. I thank you very much. We will have a sign-up sheet if you are interested in signing up and receiving notices from us as to where our next events will be in the future and so on. That'll be coming around. If you have signed up with us in the past, obviously you won't need to, but if you are someone new and are interested in that information, you can sign up on that and we will get that to you. Or if you take, again, the brochure, our website is on there. You could sign up on the website as well. So enough from me. I will bring forward Ms. Kitty Fault, and she will introduce Jerry. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I have the honor of introducing my favorite creation science speaker tonight, Jerry Frye. He is a mild-mannered businessman by day, if you can say that about anybody in the healthcare industry. And at all times, he's a powerful crusader for Christ and for the truth of Genesis and the majesty of God's creation. For his day job, Jerry is president and owner of the Benefits Services Group, which is an employee benefits brokerage firm serving employers nationwide. He consults for healthcare systems throughout the Midwest. He's a sought-after speaker for conferences, symposia, seminars, and even legislative hearings. He serves on the Advisory Council of Wisconsin's Office of the Commissioner of Insurance, Health, and Life. I didn't even know we had one of those. He's the recipient of numerous awards, including some regional Best Workplace Awards. His employees are crazy about working there. And he's also the 2010 recipient of the Better Business Bureau's Torch Award for Business Ethics and Integrity. He's also a great husband to Natalie and a terrific father to his daughters, Christine and Michelle. But we are here tonight to learn more about what Jerry does in his spare time. That's when he puts on his powerful crusader cape and digs out scientific truth, and he proclaims what he has found to anyone who is fortunate enough to be within earshot. His official company biography has this to say about his professional engagements. Mr. Frye's charismatic presence, deep subject knowledge, and keen insight make him a compelling presenter. And I'm pretty sure that by the time we're through tonight, you will be convinced that this is equally true of his creation science presentations. So let's get started. Buckle your seatbelts and hang on to your hats, because Jerry is about to get started for us.
So I won't try. Tonight we're going to talk about why it's important what you believe about origins. We live in a culture where it's okay what you believe, but don't try to foist that on me. There's this idea that anybody can have any idea and that all ideas are equal. And so we have this problem of incredibly diluted truth. So I want to share with you some truths out of the Bible, but also some scientific truths. And I want you to be careful about which one you put the most weight in. The Word of God's going to last forever. All this scientific truth is going to change, right? Some of it's wrong probably already. So just keep that in mind. Which one matters the most, and which one you have to use as the plumb bob? Which one stands as the test of the truth or veracity or application of the other? And so our culture wants to take what we perceive as scientific truth and run Scripture through it. And I'm here to say that my approach is to take Scripture and run what we see through it and see if it doesn't, in fact, testify exactly like God does. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the space-time continuum. And there are some references in Proverbs 8:22-30, about the counsels of God beforehand and about the wisdom of God. And so if you're interested in that, I recommend you go back and study that. But the purpose of the creation is to bring glory to God. And then another thing God reveals to us, and this is really important too, and that is that he reveals himself to us. He declares it to be so. The Bible is actually based on the idea of propositional truth. And propositional truth is the idea that God declares something, and then you either agree with it or you don't. You can't be neutral. He doesn't allow that position. There is no fence sitting. It's like Christ said in the New Testament, either you're for me or you're against me. And by the way, I meant to say this in the first slide, but the fact of the matter is that the same Jesus Christ we talk about in the gospel is the Jesus Christ we're talking about in creation, right? Jesus Christ is the agent of God in creation. John 1:1-3, Hebrews 1:1-3, Colossians 1, verses 15-18, all of those are in the first chapters of those books, all speak to the issue that the creation agent is Jesus Christ. And so when we talk about the Reformation and we talk about Christ alone as one of the 5 solas in the Reformation, we normally think of Christ alone in salvation, but it's really Christ alone in creation, Christ alone in salvation, and Christ alone in consummation, in judgment. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day under day utters speech, and night under night reveals knowledge. This is really important. There's no speech nor language where the voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the world, and their words to the end of the world. And so what God says is the heavens declare his glory. Now, seems obvious, but in order to declare his glory, we have to be here, okay? And we have to be able to see the heavens. We're going to talk about this a little later, but you know we're the only clear atmosphere in the solar system. There's no other body in the solar system that you can stand on the surface and look out and see the heavens at all. And the Earth happens to be located in something called the habitable zone, and that habitable zone is just, not too hot, not too cold. We're called sometimes the Goldilocks sun, Goldilocks planet, okay? We're just in the right spot. But it just turns out that our sun is in just the right spot. We're a little above the galactic plane between the fourth and the fifth arm of the Milky Way, and as a result of that, not only is this the only place we know of that's habitable, it's the only place where God's glory is observable, just like he says. We can observe the universe. And so this is a place that's unique for both habitability and observability. In Isaiah 45:18, God also says something very unique about the earth he doesn't say about anything else. And I'm not here to talk about aliens or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, he goes out of his way to say he did not create the earth in vain. He created it to be inhabited. So when we find all the fine-tuning that it took for our earth to be just the way it is, just so, to support our lives, that's a direct consequence of the counsels of God. That's a direct consequence of the Word of God. He spoke and it appeared. He created it that way. And we're going to get to the fact, well, everyone who is called by my name, whom I have created for my glory. Notice, he declares, we're created for his glory. I have formed him, yes, I have made him. He declares that he made each one of us, and the purpose that he made us for was for his glory. And then he goes on to actually stake a claim. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all who dwell therein. I may have used a different version up there, but that's the old King James. But the fact of the matter is that God says the earth is his, and everything on it, including us, is his. So that's a propositional truth. You either agree with it or you're in disagreement with it. May you be blessed by the Lord who made the heaven and the earth. The heaven, even the heavens, are the Lord's, but the earth he has given to the children of men. So not only did he make it to be inhabited, he made it to be under the dominion of man, very specifically. And this becomes really important when we get to this idea of beauty and what does nature say about God and its testimony. And then I know the title was a little provocative, Origins, Beauty, and Wrath. It seems like an odd combination, doesn't it? But this is the wrath part. And in Romans 1:16, Paul says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God unto salvation to all who believe, first to the Jew, then to the Greek." But he goes on a couple of verses later in 1:18, and he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." So he's angry about this idea of suppressing the truth. I mean, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against this activity. And what is it? Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. Since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So we're going to talk about that. So in Psalm 19, he says that there's no place on earth that people don't understand that there's a God. Every language, every place, the voice is heard. He also says here that people who deny the truth you can see in the creation around you really causes him to be angry, his wrath to be revealed against that. In Job 12, he says, "Now ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this?" In other words, all of creation speaks to the issue that God did this. "In whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind." So there is an expected response here. In Psalm 66, we're told, "Come and see the works of the Lord. He is awesome in his doing towards the sons of men. And I would hope that at the end of this presentation, when you actually see what some of these doings are, you would be as impressed as the psalmist says, that he is awesome in his doing to towards the sons of men. And so what is the natural response of this, of seeing this and understanding that God is there? It's, but as for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause, who does great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. And what he calls us to do is to share from one generation to another the truths of his acts. So that's why we're here. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is general revelation and special revelation. General revelation is what we've been talking about. The heavens declare the glory. The beasts of the earth will tell you that men are without excuse, because you can tell that God created things by what has been made. That's general revelation. And the purpose of that is to draw men so that they seek God with their whole heart, and then that yields special revelation. Psalm 19, which we read the first part, verses 1 through 6, are all about general revelation. Verse 7 says, the law of the Lord is perfect, right? Converting the soul. So we have the idea behind what we're doing here tonight, looking at general revelation, looking at the creation, and recognizing the handprint of God or the fingerprint of God, what that's supposed to do is cause us to seek God and go after special revelation, which of course is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so that's exactly how this talk is organized, right around Psalm 19. And you'll find the song, How Great Thou Art, is organized exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. So when we talk about general revelation, what is it? Well, it's general in content and audience. It's meant for everybody, whosoever will, if you would like. But it shows up in providence, in preservation, and conscience, which we are substantially not going to talk about tonight. What we are going to talk about is how God's general revelation shows up in nature. Okay, so that this isn't an all-inclusive treaty on general revelation, just some aspects of how it shows up in nature. Then beauty. Beauty is the quality present in a thing or person that gives intense pleasure or deep satisfaction to the mind, whether it arises from sensory manifestations, so that's shape, sound, patterns, etc., colors, a meaningful design or pattern, and there is a third thing. It's like a beautiful person, a beautiful quality, and we're not going to talk about that. We're really going to talk about the first two, physical manifestations of beauty. What constitutes beauty? Why do we think something's beautiful and something else is not? And this essentially is all part of revelation in nature. One of the first concepts that becomes interesting when you start thinking about this is the idea that we're going to find mathematical relationships in nature. And I want you to think about something right off the bat. Where did mathematics come from? Secular science tells us that mathematics came out of the mind of man. Okay? So why is it, and I'll take you through a number of physicists, why is it physicists consistently tell us that mathematics is the most elegant description of the universe? How is it that math happens to perfectly fit the experience we're in? Are we that good? Okay, I mean, that's really the question. And so in an article that was published by Eugene Wigner in 1960, this has been an issue in secular science for 50 years now. They've known about this issue. And that is, why do mathematical concepts have applicability far beyond the context in which they were originally developed? He says, it is important, and I want to read this right, it is important to point out that the mathematical formulation of the physicist's often crude experience leads in an uncanny number of cases to an amazingly accurate description of a large class of phenomena. I'll give you an example. Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton comes up with a fairly elegant formula about gravity after watching an apple fall from a tree. Now, any of you who've done physics and know the formula, it's pretty involved, and it's not my intention to try to teach you that tonight. But how is it that you can take that formula and with almost very scant observation, it's in the next slide, very scant observation on a couple of places, then predict where all 8 planets, Pluto's not a planet anymore, where all 8 planets are going to be, okay? So at the end of the day, you can predict where Pluto is too, by the way, but all 8 planets get predicted. Why is it that something that we see right there comes out of our mind, this formula, then turns out to have this universal application? It turns out it works on the quantum level as well. Well, this particular physicist, who is not a believer, or wasn't a believer, I'm sure he's long since deceased, here's what his response was. He invokes the law of gravitation as an example. Originally used to model freely falling bodies on the surface of the Earth, the law was extended on the basis of what Wigner terms very scant observations to describe the motion of planets, where it has proved accurate beyond all reasonable expectations. His response is this statement: the miracle, notice that word, the miracle, the miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift. In other words, it came to us, which we neither understand nor deserve. We should be grateful for it. Well, it seems to me that that is precisely what the psalmist says should happen when we observe nature. Believer or not, you should come to the sense of awe and wonder, how can this be? Okay, and so that's a proper response. That's not the response of our culture, by the way. This is 1960, okay? So the very fact that we can do science at all points towards God and the idea that God has left fingerprints all over, and I'm going to share with you what some of those are. Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the world we live in is that it's comprehensible. If the universe happened as a result of a cosmic explosion and the accretion of planets out of a whirling pile of dust, and ultimately led to us, where our brains are a series of accidental collisions of molecules, why is it that we should be able to understand the universe at all? It's an accident. We're an accident. Why is it we can commune with the universe? Why is it we can understand how it works? I mean, you think about that, it is a miracle. It really is. Einstein also said God does not play dice. So, in other words, he was saying it doesn't appear like there's any accidents. Nothing is random. Sorry, you can't see the red very good. So let's talk about beauty for a minute. I took a picture here of along the lake. You see a reflection. You see all those colors on the leaves, and it really is spectacular. I mean, let's face it, Wisconsin's fabulous in the fall. This winter wasn't bad either, but the fall really is spectacular. But let's just see, what does it take to do that? Well, first thing is the Earth has to be at a 23.5 degree tilt. If it was a different tilt, we wouldn't get the right sunlight. Then we have to have exactly the right sun. We don't know of another sun out of all the other suns. And by the way, we think there are about 170 billion galaxies, each with 100 to 200 billion stars. And as far as we can tell, none of them are the same. And that's what the psalmist tells us. And God, we can't even count them. God's named them all. Okay? So first off, you have to have this unique sun. 90% of the light spectrum shows up in exactly the temperature and the spectrum we need. We have this tilt to the Earth. And then we have this unbelievably complex set of things that happen in the tree. So we have chlorophyll. It's there all the time. Chlorophyll, by the way, is there all the time, even when the leaves turn. It's just that the other pigments made up of anthocyanins and carotenoids, they turn the leaves different colors, and they show up depending upon temperature, sugar concentration, and the amount of light. Now, all of this activity happens along with a mix of tannins which show up. Tannins are the brown. And these three very separate and distinct chemical reactions all happen within a period of 2 to 3 weeks so that the leaves will all change color. And now I got the $64,000 question. What benefit is it to the tree that leaves change colors at all? None. The leaves are going to drop off. The leaves are not necessary. This is called added beauty. There's no reason for it. The tree doesn't need it. So the only reason it got to be is us. Somebody who can observe the beauty, right? Does a cat care? does a dog care? Cat doesn't care about much of anything, but, you know, the issue is, you know, it's not just that the beauty is there. What did it take to do? And I gave you a couple of things. You know, we have a clear atmosphere. That's apparently because of the amount of uranium we have in the crust. Then you've got things like the aurora borealis. These are beautiful. We've had some here this month in northern Wisconsin. And they come because the Earth is 93 million miles away from the sun, and the sun has these very massive, called CMEs, coronal mass ejections, used to be called solar flares. And we have these satellites in orbit about 1 million miles from Earth, so 92 million miles from the sun, and they're called solar observatories. And they take pictures of the sun all the time. I have an app on my iPhone. I thought about showing it to you, but I can literally watch what the sun's doing right now. And so we track that stuff. And when the sun does one of these coronal mass ejections, that's what it kind of looks like. And so if the Earth didn't have the magnetic shield that it does, and the only other rocky planet of the four is Mercury, and its magnetic shield gets completely overwhelmed, so that the surface is bombarded constantly by solar rays, not Earth. Our magnetic shield literally protects us from this. If our magnetic shield went down ever, you know, like Star Trek, when the shields go down, done. We're done. It would only take one. Too much radiation, it would wipe off the life on the face of the Earth. We couldn't take it. So we happen to be the only one of the rocky planets that happens to have one of these magnetic shields, an incredibly powerful one. And it's the interaction of these cosmic rays and our magnetic shield that causes that aurora borealis. So you just start thinking about the massive, unbelievable things that are going on in order to create what looks to us like pretty lights in the sky. Peacock. The peacock has been a challenge to evolution from day one. It turns out, and I really recommend you go to the AIG website. There's some very detailed scientific work that's been done on peacock feathers, and they are unbelievably complicated, not only in structure, but in how they do iridescence. Their iridescence is done through thin film transparencies. I'm going to show you another kind of iridescence shortly that's due to photonic crystals. But this particular, the peacock, it has an organization that seems to be way beyond what's necessary for survival. As a matter of fact, the beauty of the peacock is actually referred to as added beauty. And so added beauty is this idea of a column. I think I got a little picture up there that you can see. So you have a column that has a function. The function is to hold up some weight, hold up a beam, a cross beam, whatever. But we make columns pretty. Now, the prettiness doesn't have any function. The column will function without it, but we make them more beautiful. Corinthians and Doric and all the other kinds of columns that we have, that's added beauty. Darwin said about this, the third bullet point, that a great number of male animals have been rendered beautiful for beauty's sake. The most refined beauty may serve as a charm for the female and no other purpose. Added beauty is a specific hallmark of design. Only designers add added beauty. And so we have added beauty all over creation. Matter of fact, I thought I had another slide there. I think I did. Darwin on the origin of beauty. I'll go back to the butterflies, I promise. I have a slide on what Darwin thought about the peacock. The sight of the feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. And the reason he said that was because this actually destroys the theory of evolution. He said that beauty, the very existence of beauty, which is not necessary for survival, is something that takes energy. It takes design. It takes a lot of, theoretically, things that should be used to propagate the species, or things that should be used to make the species better in some other way. And so for about 130 years, added beauty, or beauty in and of itself, beauty for beauty's purpose, has always been a serious challenge to the doctrine of evolution. Moving back, we have blue morph butterflies. I had some out front. This is an example of some of the blue morph butterflies. And interestingly enough, most of you will tell me that the vast majority of these are blue, and I will tell you they have no color at all. None. Because if you turn them around, they're all brown, and this is pigment. On the front, there is no color except that which is radiated back, iridescence. What happens is you have to look in a microscope down about 20,000 power, and you'll find photonic crystals emerge. And so what happens is light has wave properties and it has particle properties. So you take the wave properties, they have wavelengths. Each color has a different wavelength. And so a prism breaks apart white light into all its discrete wavelengths, and you get all those colors, right? So all those colors hit the surface, these iridescent surfaces, and what happens is the first layer breaks the light up like a prism does, and succeeding layers use interference and convergence and block out all the colors that we're not supposed to see. It's absolutely stunning. There's about 100 different species, and while that's remarkable enough, the backs are all pigment. And these are all variations of the same genus, and at the end of the day, the backs match the trees in the range in which these are found. So that means if this happened by evolution, every time a tree is different, the back of the butterfly has to evolve differently. That stretches credibility to the point of credulity. And I don't think I said that word right, but you know what I mean. So we have these all over. Back. So we get to Aristotle and Plato, and they both said the mathematical sciences exhibit order, symmetry, and limitation, and these are the greatest forms of beauty. That was Aristotle. And Plato, like him, said the mathematical rules of the universe are visible to the men in the form of beauty. This is centuries ago, as actually it's millennia ago. Men have known this. Scripture says not only do we know this, man has known this. It has always been evident to man, and I'll take you through that. Ancient man has known this too. I want to talk just a little bit before we get into some more of the beauty and the design of the origin of information. It's really important to understand that the battle for origins in many ways has come down to this issue. Where did the information come from? Because as far as we can tell, there's no property of matter or there's no process of nature that creates information. So where does the information come from? And of course, evolution says we need new information so we can make more, bigger, better, right? That's what they say. When in fact, the second law of thermodynamics says quite clearly that we don't get more, bigger, better, we keep getting worse, smaller, wrecked, right? We also have this idea of mathematics and its beauty, its elegance. And so I'll just show you a few mathematical formulas. There's no reason why math should be this elegant. When you take math and start laying it out in certain patterns, you find that all kinds of interesting patterns emerge. And I suspect this didn't come out of the mind of man. I'll show you why in a couple of minutes. And so this leads to an idea called the Fibonacci sequence. And Fibonacci was a mathematician in 12th century Italy, and he came up with this sequence. And the sequence is essentially this. It starts with two whole numbers, integers, positive, 0 and 1. Those are the first two. The next number will be the addition of the first two, 0, 1. The next number will be the previous two. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Then it's 1 plus 2 is 3. So you get a series that's 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. You can notice that each number is just the sum of the two numbers in front of it. Seems like a simple enough thing, except that what we find when we do this Fibonacci thing is that when we divide them out, very quickly, it settles into, and I'm sorry you can't see that very well, but it settles into something called the golden ratio, which is essentially an irrational number. That means a number that doesn't have an end, like 1/3 is an irrational number, right? 0.33333333. It's irrational because it'll never end. So the idea is that there's an irrational number, and it's about 1.1618. And the first way that this manifests itself is called the golden ratio or the golden line. And this is 1, and this is 0.61. And this ratio, interestingly enough, we're going to talk about for a little while. It's a golden ratio, and it's approximately this, and they even sell T-shirts with it on there, so if I'd have been smart, I'd have had one. The ratio is denoted by the Greek lowercase letter phi. It's really important that it's not confused with pi. That's also a Greek letter, right? Phi, this is pi, this is phi. Pi is 3.14. It's also an irrational number, okay? And it also has a lot of things, but we're not going to talk about pi tonight. We're talking about phi, which is the golden ratio. And so it shows up as golden lines. It shows up as golden rectangles. It shows up as golden triangles. It shows up as golden pentagrams, golden angles, and golden spirals. And I've already shown you a couple of nautilus shells. What happens is, as you follow the spiral out, it precisely follows the Fibonacci sequence. Precisely. What you're looking at there is a sunflower, and what it has is all the seeds are distributed according to the golden angle of 137.5. It's actually an irrational number, but that's the rounded number. What happens when you use that distribution is you get something called phyllotaxis, which means that there will always be a Fibonacci number of rows in one direction, in this case 34, and a Fibonacci rows in the other direction, 21. Larger sunflowers will be 34 and 55, and there are even some 55 and 89. So the larger it gets, it'll simply go to the next Fibonacci number. Half the rows go one direction, the other half go the other direction. Turns out, as you might imagine, that this is the perfect distribution to get the most seeds in the smallest amount of area that can still get all the sunlight, be serviced by the insects, and share the water. Big surprise, huh? Well, it turns out that that's 137.5. If you go to 137.6, you only get that. In other words, if it's off 1/10 of 1 degree in angle, the entire schema falls apart. You don't get phyllotaxis, it doesn't run in both directions, and you get a far suboptimal number in the distribution. So the gangle will always be exactly the golden mean. And you saw some of the geometry in the film. I'm not going to try to teach you all that. But the idea is that it shows up over and over, and we're going to spend some time on that. And so it all starts with the first one has to start at 137.5 angle, and each one after that has to be that distribution off of that, and you'll get this phyllotaxis. There's another interesting thing about the Fibonacci sequence. I have no idea what to make of this, other than if you take the 12th value in the Fibonacci sequence, it's 89, and you divide it into unity, which is 1, you get that number up there. And when you take that number and express it out into something you can add up, on the end here, you get the Fibonacci sequence again. I have no idea how long somebody took to figure that out. But it's not a random number sequence. Some people think it's the 12 disciples into Christ, but I'm just telling you it's a curiosity of the Fibonacci sequence. Well, it turns out sunflower seeds aren't the only ones that are organized around. It turns out the world of botany is dominated. 90% of all plants in the botany world use some organization around Fibonacci ratios, Fibonacci sequences, and so up there are some. Now there are plants that have non-Fibonacci. There's another sequence called the Lucas numbers, and they show up about 8 times. And then you got 2 that don't show up at all to one of the sequences that I'm going to suggest we don't understand yet. Okay, we just don't know the sequence. This has been known for many, many, many years. And so this is a form of cauliflower. It's called Romanesque. It's actually, believe it or not, a cross between broccoli and cauliflower. Okay, so we would say that this probably preceded those other 2, right? So if you don't like one, you're certainly not going to like this one. But the fact of the matter is, it's 13 in one direction and 8 in the other. Always. Pine cones. All pine cones show the same phyllotaxis. So you can see it, if you took the top of the pine cone, it'll have 8 going in one direction, 13 going in the other. If it's easier for you to see it this way, you have the green and the yellow lines showing you the distribution. So pine cones are almost invariably Fibonacci numbers, and they will show phyllotaxis. That means spirals going in opposite directions of sequential Fibonacci numbers. Pineapple, 5 in one direction, 8 in another, and 13 in a third. All Fibonacci numbers, 5, 8, 13. By the way, that sequence we're going to talk about a lot. Shows up all the time. Well, it turns out most plants have 8 leaves in 5 revolutions. So if you have a plant that's organized around a single stalk, it will have 5 revolutions on it, and there'll be 8 leaves in that period. So it turns out it shows up on most leafy plants. So there you have some examples, ferns, etc. Sometimes you'll get a Fibonacci spiral on the end. You'll almost always get an 8 to 5 phyllotaxis. And often you'll get the 137.5. This is a fern, etc., golden spirals. And they're out there. They're just everywhere all around us. We don't think about it. By the way, this sequence, this This is often referred to as the fingerprint of God. Now, out on the web, you're going to find a lot of things that can affirm that, and you're going to find other things that say this is the Fibonacci flim-flam, right? Secular scientists aren't too crazy about this whole idea, and we'll talk about that a little more. Roses, all the inside petals of a rose are all according to Fibonacci sequences. Yellow chamomile, that's T. These are all various kinds of daisies, all follow the Fibonacci spiral. In addition, trees and branching plants also have this. So it turns out that as a tree branches, or as a plant branches up, you're going to find that it follows this same pattern. It'll have this number of branches are called axils. Every time the branch splits, that's called an axil. So you'll find that there are a Fibonacci number of trees and a Fibonacci number of axils at each layer moving up a plant. It's absolutely stunning. By the way, that's the inside of a banana and apple. Most of our fruits are broken up into Fibonacci numbers of sections. So here's the idea. In addition to the petals on the flowers, this happens to be an example called sneezewort. I'm allergic to it, so I chose it. The petal numbers on the flowers, the branches will produce a Fibonacci sequence. So not only do the petals on the flowers, the number of leaves found at each layer and the number of branches at each axial break are all Fibonacci numbers. In other words, the plant's organized from the ground up around those sequences. Cactus are almost all organized around Fibonacci numbers. I guess we'll never look at them quite the same way again. These are pollen seeds, a little too small for most of us to see, but if you put it under a microscope, you'll find the same thing. Remember, if you seek him with all your heart, you will find him everywhere you look. This happens to be the passion fruit. It has two sets of 5 green petals. This is what the bottom looks like. It's white on top. 5 green stamens, T-shaped, 3 brown carpels, and the crown that's the purple, has 89 projections. I know it's repetitious, but those are all Fibonacci numbers. Passion fruit. We have cabbage. These are an example of fractals. These are also Fibonacci numbers, but they're irrational. Fractals are how our lungs, our alveoli are organized, river deltas, things like that. And they're repeating patterns of irrational numbers, but they will round out to the Fibonacci numbers. Fractals will become important in a minute, but we have many of our vegetables that are organized that way. The animal kingdom is not left out. Almost all ram's horns, etc., are various types of Fibonacci sequences. The way the elephant's head is organized turns out to be a golden rectangle and a golden spiral, both. This happens to be under a microscope, green algae. Turns out we get Fibonacci sequences right along here, which is going to look curiously like DNA in a few minutes. We have it in the animal kingdom, octopus, tentacles, seahorses, chameleons, etc. And those happen to be fossils. Can you imagine all those fossils? That took quite a flood to create that. But I mean, I'm a big person, and that's bigger than me. And look at this. This is one ammonite. So they're out there, and these are all according to Fibonacci sequences. So like the nautilus today, the ammonites years ago had the same kind of structure. These are our nautiluses. They're the most common example you'll find out on the web talking about Fibonacci sequences. But I could take many animals. And you can see I can go to fish, I can go to insects, I can go to dolphins, sea creatures. You can go to insects here, you can go to the tiger's face. You will find these golden ratios throughout nature. I could give you thousands of examples. So this isn't an accident. So let's talk about the human body. You were formed in my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. Let's just talk about that. Interestingly enough, when you close the human hand, you will get a Fibonacci spiral. I'll show you precisely why I can be sure about that in just a minute. but you will. That has something to do with the fact that all of your fingers, each joint in the fingers has a Fibonacci ratio to the next joint, 1.6, okay? The human body, from the navel to the head, is Fibonacci ratio. The very DNA molecule, each time you get a rung, is 34 angstroms by 21 angstroms, which is a Fibonacci sequence, and each rung is a golden rectangle. So the ratio of the molecule is built that way. When you take your hand and the elbow, you'll get this divine proportion. But watch the hand. These are all ratios in our hands that are Fibonacci ratios, golden ratios. This thing will go for a long time. There's about 150 Fibonacci ratios in the human hand. It's just going to go on and on. And it happens whether you do it radial or linear. You can do triangles, you can do rectangles, it doesn't matter. It's like a perfect design. So we get the DNA molecule. Even when it replicates, it breaks into 5 strands and 3 strands, Fibonacci numbers, broken into 2 branches to 1, again, Fibonacci numbers. And again, it's 34 by 21 angstroms. And so it turns out that the very molecule that is the information code, it's not life. God said the life is in the blood. The only cells in your body that don't have any DNA are red blood cells. It's extracted before the red blood cells are used. I think God did that on purpose. The life is in the blood. The life is not in the DNA. DNA is an information set. DNA is the most elegant software system you have ever seen. Information system. These are called Mandelbrot series. These are those irrational things, and irrational, listen to me. It's the Mandelbrot is a logarithmic spiral, and those are irrational spirals that round out to the Fibonacci spiral. And it becomes important, these fractals, because they become a big part of the human genome and the golden ratio. This is some work that was just published in September of 2010 by a doctor named J.C. Perez in France. It was published in French, that's why it took a while to get over here. And it's a peer-reviewed paper proving that the whole human genome codon populations are managed by a dragon fractal paper folding curve. All that means is that these folding structures within the human codon are fine-tuned around the golden ratio. Particularly, his paper entitled Codon Populations in Single-Stranded Whole Human Genome DNA are fractal and fine-tuned by the golden ratio 1.618, shows that the universal genetic code table not only maps codons to amino acids, but serves as a global checksum matrix at the whole genome macrostructural scale. And there will be a test. That is a mouthful, and I'm not going to try to memorize it. I'm just telling you that there are plenty of scientists out there. This Fibonacci stuff is nonsense. And there are plenty other very serious scientists that are finding not only is it not nonsense, it goes all the way down to the very core of how we're put together. We are, in fact, wonderfully made, right? Fearfully and wonderfully made. And God says he did it. And he wants credit. So the Codex Biogenesis, it's important to note that Jean-Claude Perez does not consider himself a creationist. He has spent 30 years on this question. How is the mystery of life emerging? By self-organization, in other words, is nature doing this, or by God? He has come to the conclusion, yet certainly not by random chance or hazard. It has to be one of the other two. There is organization. There is design. The question is, where is it coming from? Where does the information come from? The second question is related to the central role played by integer numbers and the golden ratio in mathematics in the hidden rules of life. My main research is self-organization. He has declared he is a naturalist. He is a Darwinist. He doesn't believe in God. But he believes in science, and he believes in the fact of what he's finding. And when he's asked, Could self-organization explain the genesis of life? He says, presently, after 30 years of research around this central question, I have no consistent response. So what that means is no. Okay? I mean, he's an evolutionist. He gets paid that way. He doesn't, really want to say, but at the end of the day, he is being honest about where the evidence leads, that the human genome is structured around the golden ratio. You can make of it what you will about that, but it's a fact. It turns out that if I go even deeper than the genome and I go down to the fundamental atomic asymmetries, you may or may not know that it's asymmetries that drive energy release, etc. So when we look at the structure of atomic nuclei, the distribution of fission fragments when we have collisions, distribution of the number of isotopes, so there's different kinds of, like carbon-12, carbon-14, still carbon, just has a different number of electrons and sometimes neutrons. Distribution of emitted particles, etc. They all organize themselves around values that are approximately equal to golden ratios, and the numbers forming the values are often Fibonacci or sometimes near Fibonacci numbers down at the subatomic level. God goes to a couple of specific organs in our body, the eye and the ear. Proverbs 20:12 declares, the hearing eye and the hearing ear, and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. It seems odd he would point out those two, but if you think about it, those are the two principal organs in taking in information to understand his special revelation, and his general revelation for that matter. Much of it has to be taken in through those two organs, and we know how wonderful they are. I'm going to go back to the human ear here on the outside. Turns out that the auricles of all mammals are some Fibonacci spiral ratio, all of them, including humans. And it turns out our cochlea in the inner ear, everybody knows about that, right? That is a Fibonacci spiral, the cochlea. So what does the world say about this? There are scientists on the other side, and they say that, first off, an interesting observation, something I'd never really thought about before, but the world, whether it's a human looking at a painting or a gazelle in the open plain scanning the horizon, is basically organized on the horizontal. So what science is telling us is that as we scan with our eyes, we scan horizontally first. It's the way we read, too. That's why the Chinese have trouble, I think. No, I'm just kidding. No, but it turns out that we can assimilate information faster if it's organized on the horizontal and it's done in golden ratio proportions. We have no idea why that is, but the theory that's coming out is something called coevolution. This is not the last time you're going to hear this tonight. Coevolution is the thing that's being used to explain, for instance, symbiotic relationships. How do you get that, right? Which came first, the chicken and the egg kind of thing? And I'll show you some of those in a bit. So they come up with the idea of this coevolution, and the idea is that the eye organized itself around the golden ratio because there are forces in nature that force everything into golden ratios. Now again, we don't know of any property of nature that can create information or in fact even enforce information. But in fact, what they're saying is both of these things evolve at the same time. And as a matter of fact, not only do they both evolve at the same time, it's because the other exists, each other exists, that they evolve. One pushes the other, right? Now, I don't know how they think this is happening over millions of years. Sounds to me like it's got to happen right now, but that's a theory. So I thought I'd leave that up there, that vision and cognition, the idea of what you think and how your brain sees things and how your eyes pass information to the brain, they're saying all three of those things evolved at the same time because they work elegantly and they work better when we observe things in golden ratios. So it is the oneness of vision, cognition, and locomotion as the design of the movement of all animals on Earth. The phenomenon of the golden ratio contributes to this understanding, the idea that pattern and diversity coexist as integral and necessary features of the evolutionary design of nature. So they seem free to use the idea of patterns and design, but they will attribute it to nature. And this is what God says: they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They can see what's been made, but they deny it. Right? They can see it, but they'll deny it. So these mathematical patterns in nature, there's another fundamental thing about them. Not only do they cause us to kind of wonder, how does that happen? I don't think there are too many people in this audience that are confused about that, but how does this happen? But at the end of the day, humans are the only species that can recognize these patterns in nature. Like I said, I don't think cats care, or mice, or chickens, or anything else. Only humans. And not only can we recognize the information, we can recognize something else, and that's called aesthetics, beauty. So that information can be added. There can be added beauty, and we can recognize that as well. So it's only the human mind that can actually assess, diagnose the idea that it's there, identify that it's there, and then appreciate both the information and the aesthetics. So when you look at the human face, it turns out that the things that we consider to be beautiful turn out to be Fibonacci sequences. And when they do cosmetic surgery, they have tools that are organized so that they can make them wider or less, but they're always in Fibonacci ratios. And this applies to teeth, to eyes, to smiles, to noses. Doesn't matter. This is all used and has been used for some time in cosmetic surgery. So men have known about this for a long time. I told my wife I put this in here as a reset. We're talking about the world, but let's get back and talk about Scripture for just a minute. As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. Everything. We're supposed to give him glory for this. I'm not sure why that disappeared. All right. Men have known about this ratio for many, many years. This is the Mona Lisa. Turns out you can put a Fibonacci spiral in a Fibonacci rectangle, and it fits perfectly. And it turns out Michelangelo not only knew about it, he used it. Some people think he sketched it into the bottom of his canvases. That's a self-portrait of Leonardo. And I had somebody say, well, why does that? It doesn't fit. Exactly. Leonardo had no intention of painting himself as being a model of perfection. And so his nose doesn't fit the lines. His ears don't fit the lines. His eyes are the wrong distance. So that he did that on purpose. But you can apply any of the ratios to the Mona Lisa. So it's kind of fascinating. People say, why? Why that? I don't know, but this might be part of it. The golden ratios are pleasing to our eyes. Turns out he wasn't the only one. That's a self-portrait of Rembrandt on the bottom. That's the Last Supper on the top, and another Michelangelo piece up here. All have ratios in their art that are golden ratios. So if you just put art and golden ratio in, you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples, in particular from the Renaissance period. This is an example of a golden rectangle, or triangle for Rembrandt's self-portrait. This is the bathers. It's not only used for the size of the bathers, but the location of the bathers to each other. Turns out when we use golden ratios, we get very, very good perspective in our paintings. This is Michelangelo's Holy Family. And this is the Crucifixion by Raphael. And so you can use a number of them. So a lot of our art has been driven by this. It turns out, so is Twitter. Go on to the websites and tell it you want to do web design. Hundreds of sites will come up trying to teach you how to design all of your web stuff in golden ratios. The size of the panels, the size of the fonts, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're going to leave the planet for just a bit and go into our solar system. And it turns out, when you take the log of the distance of the planet from the sun and the time it takes to go around, and you create the ratios, the logarithmic ratios of those synoptic periods, they're called, it turns out we get these ratios up here. So Neptune to Pluto to Uranus is 1 to 1 to 2. Uranus, 1 to 2 to 3. Saturn, 2 to 3 to 5. Jupiter, 3 to 5 to 8. And so on and so on. You'll find all of them, interestingly enough, are Fibonacci sequences. Sure seems like that seems awfully odd to be an accident. Sure looks like the planets were placed right where they were supposed to be. By the way, the idea of Fibonacci sequences and Isaac Newton's discovery or idea of gravity were the tools, all the tools that the astronomers needed to find Neptune and Pluto. They were both found simply by doing the math because they understood this. It turns out when we take the Fibonacci ratio of the average log value, we get 1.618 of all of the planet's rotations. And we look at the design of the planet Saturn, you get golden rectangles on the rings, the planet itself, and 2 of its moons. It turns out when you take the Earth and the moon and put them next to each other, you get a golden triangle when you go to the center of each and do the radius. It just seems like this is a little more than chance could bear. You also have the 4 rocky planets, which are inside the asteroid belt. You probably understand the construction of our solar system as 4 rocky planets, a very large, well-populated asteroid belt, and then 4 gas giants to the outside. These planets, when you take the orbits here, it doesn't show up very well. I'm sorry about that. But when you take their orbits, the synoptic average, you get a Fibonacci spiral of the first 4 planets. Then there's something really unique about Venus and Earth. It turns out that 8 Earth years, 8 times around the sun, is precisely equal to 13 Venus years around the sun, during which they kiss, that means they conjoin, 5 times. 5, 8, 13. I told you it's going to show up some more. Okay, 5, 8, 13. And when they conjoin, it turns out that Venus's rotation on its own axis means that the same exact spot on Venus is facing the same spot on Earth those 5 times. Just an accident. And when you do something called a homograph, that would mean that you would look and plot the positions of the planets in relation to one another as though you were above the solar plane, right? All the planets are on the same plane. By the way, that's one of the reasons Pluto got kicked out. It was 8 degrees off the plane of the rest of the planets. So that was one of the reasons they gave. But you get this figure here over 13 orbits. That sure looks like an elegant design to me. And those are the orbits in relation to one another over 13 years. Turns out violins are organized according to this ratio. And there's something called the Pythagorean quadrivium. In ancient times, liberal arts were made up of 7 subjects. The quadrivium is 4. The quadrivium were considered true knowledge. They were based on numbers. Arithmetic, pure number. Music is number in time. Geometry is number in space. And astronomy is number in space and time. So when we look at music, for instance, you look at a scale. A scale has 13 notes. There are 8 regular notes and there are 5 flats and sharps. The octave is 2 to 1. The fifth is 3 to 2. Majors are 5 to 3. Minors are 8 to 5. Those are all Fibonacci numbers. And so you can actually put Fibonacci numbers. Oops. Mistake. You're not supposed to see that yet. All right. Sorry, I have really big fingers, and this is a really small thing, and I'm goofing it up. What I'm trying to get to well, it worked during practice. I would like to play for you the Fibonacci notes if I could. Maybe if I just don't touch it for a minute, it'll catch up to me. There it is. What do you know? So those are Fibonacci notes. If you add chords, I know it's not going to come as a shock to you now, but some of our great composers used Fibonacci sequences in composing their music. I mentioned the 4 in the quadrivium. The other 3 were the trivium of language. This is really important for our day and age and education. The trivium of language, and this was the core of any liberal arts education, was structured on cardinal and objective values of truth, beauty, and goodness. And grammar was taught for the good structure of language, logic was for finding truth, and rhetoric was for sharing truth. So it was all about truth. And then the pure truth was the 4 based on numbers. On the lower right of the slide is the seal of the University of Pennsylvania from 1740, based on those 7 cardinal subjects. And if you think about today, that's part of our problem, is there's really little search for truth. That's an ancient Egyptian stele on the left. It's all organized according to Fibonacci numbers. Vitruvius Man from Leonardo da Vinci is a study in Fibonacci numbers. It turns out the pyramids, cathedrals, and most Greek architecture are all based on golden ratios and Fibonacci numbers. Turns out that the theaters, in this case, this is the one in Epidov, is constructed for the 40th Olympiad. It was made to hold 15,000 people. It has 34 rows on the bottom, 21 rows on the top. The angle is exactly 137.5, and its complement 225.5. The ratio is used in nearly all ancient theaters. So they may be larger, but it'll just be 2 Fibonacci numbers. And so you'll find this throughout ancient history. You've got the Parthenon up there. You have the porch of maidens in the Acropolis at Athens. Of course, the Great Pyramid at Giza. The Parthenon, you can see the top has gone there, but when you put it back on, the ratios are there. And it turns out that the Chartres Cathedral and the rose windows are all done according to Fibonacci numbers, as is the UN building. Every 10 floors is a golden rectangle. And the CNN Tower, which at one time, the CN Tower, which at one time was the tallest structure in the world, that's a golden ratio there. And it turns out that there are just a pile of things in our wallets and in our desks that are all organized according to these Fibonacci ratios, golden ratios. So they're very popular. Now, on the websites, what you'll find, Fibonacci flim-flam, right? Well, there's 8.5 by 11, right? There's 11 by 17. Those aren't Fibonacci numbers. Well, God didn't make those. So, all right. There's actually a TV series on right now, and I am not shilling for a secular TV show, okay? I just want you to know that like numbers on TV is a lot of mathematical concepts embedded into a crime detective kind of show. Some of you may have seen that. So Keith Sutherland's latest one is called Touch, and it's about his ability to see relationships in all of nature and in humanity as a result of this golden ratio and Fibonacci sequences. So this has now hit its stride in secular world. And it's all based on this book, The Divine Code of Da Vinci, Fibonacci, Einstein, and you. So that's a nice bunch of people to be compared to, by the way. We're going to go into the sea for a little bit. These are shells. They all have Fibonacci spirals. And shells are like the poster child for Fibonacci as well as botany. But a little hard to explain this. These are called salps. Those are colonies of animals, and they're free to go wherever they want, but they organize themselves in the middle of the ocean in Fibonacci spirals. Nobody can quite figure out why they do that, other than God must have programmed them to do that, and so I'm sure there's some really good reason that they do it. But there's pictures of them. Very interesting animals. So what we have is this wide array of things from the solar system to botany in the ocean, etc., that this fingerprint of God shows up, this ratio. I want to get back to the idea of beauty a little bit, though. And, you know, this is a nice picture of a shallow picture in the sea, and we see all the color of the various parts. But I want to talk about that. You see lots of animals that have tremendous color, tremendous, it's just unbelievable beauty right below the ocean. So I'm just going to go through a few of these here, and I'm going to ask you, why are they colorful? That's what you see right there, right? With a bright sun burning overhead in the tropics, you can get good natural color all the way down to 30 or 40 feet. How deep's the ocean? 7 miles? Not 30 or 40 feet. And a lot of those pictures aren't taken at 30 or 40 feet. Why are they beautiful? Below that, everything starts to turn blue as red light is filtered out. Our eyes are capable of adjusting, but cameras can't. And so we can see some of it, but not so much. As a matter of fact, in open ocean by 200 meters, we're in the euphotic zone. Less than 1% of the light is available down there, and virtually no colors, only deep purple or almost a black. And in coastal waters, 50 meters, it's 150 feet. It's gone. You can't see anything. So why are they colorful? So the colors disappear at different lengths. Again, we're talking about wavelengths of color, right? So the ocean water absorbs the wavelengths, and red gets absorbed first, and then the oranges, and then the yellows. And so that's why, as you get down, about all you can see is blues and some violets. So even cameras will get fooled. You can see there's very little color, and the diffusion rate on cameras is usually underwater is less than 20 feet. So not only can you not go very deep, you can't shoot very far, and you lose all the color. So why is the color there? Well, these are called sea slugs. They are the most disgusting things to pick up. They are real slimy, and they are anywhere from 1 inch to 3 to 4 inches long. And interestingly enough, these are all sea slugs. And I think what I did is went past something. I wanted to show you something. If you go, well, I'm having trouble with this, my technical skills again. Looks like I gotta wait for it to catch up to me again. What I wanted to show you is if you put the word nudibranch in Google Images, wait for a second here. It should come up for us. So these nudibranchs, that's what they're called, NUDI branch. See how beautiful they are? And the shapes and the colors, and you know, they get a little washed out on a big screen like this. You just have to put it on your high definition monitor. You'll be stunned. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of varieties of these things. And the reason I wanted to show you that is because this is a scientific study from one part of the world, but it's the same everywhere. And that is, where do we find these things? There are hundreds of these species. Well, depth. What's the biorange? Depth. That's in Swedish. That's white stuff. 514 to 923 meters. That's 1,500 meters below the ocean, that species. And so when we look at that, the vast majority of these species are well below 100 meters. Why in the world do they look like that? They're gorgeous. They're really slimy, though. Don't pick them up. They're gorgeous. They're unbelievably gorgeous. And you can't see the colors down there, and neither can the animals. Not a question of what kind of eyes you have. It's a question of what kind of light's down there, right? If you don't have the right wavelength of the light, you can't emit the color. You can't show the color because it doesn't get absorbed. So how do we see color down there? How does that happen? We make special equipment. We build special cameras that can handle the temperature, that can handle can create natural light. So who's the only people who can enjoy those colors? Humans. And only because we can create the means and the mechanism to go down and find them. Seek me with all of your heart, and you will find me. There's no other reason for them to be like that. Then when you get down to the sea vents on the bottom of the ocean, these happen to be from 5,000 feet down, which isn't too deep, actually, for sea vents. But this is an area where there's crushing pressure, freezing temperatures, and no sunlight. This is below the euphotic zone. There is no sunlight here, none. Euphotic is the zone where there's only 1% natural light. So what are those things? Those are called tube worms. They grow 8 feet in length. They have no mouth and no digestive tract. So you might wonder, what in the world do they eat? They don't eat. So how in the world do they live? And why are they red? What was the first color that disappears when you go under the water? Red. So God makes them red on the ocean floor. That's because he put hemoglobin in them. So they take oxygen out of the water just like we breathe oxygen, except that they don't actually use most of the oxygen for themselves. They give the oxygen to the bacteria that live in their tissues. And the bacteria turn the toxic chemicals, the sulfur, the heavy metals, etc., that come out of the vents at, by the way, superheated temperatures. So not only do they live in an environment that's super cold, but they're sitting right on top of vents coming right out of the middle of the earth, and so it's superheated down there. And these bacteria turn the toxic chemicals into organic molecules that can be absorbed into the animal. So I have an animal down there who can't eat and can't live without the bacteria. The bacteria can't live without the animal, right? I have a true symbiotic relationship. That funny word, coevolution, shows up again. Okay? And so they say these two are there because of that. Now, the only issue is you really have trouble finding anything within 4,000 feet of the surface that has where did it come from? What do they eat? Where did the bacteria come from? The bacteria can only live in these tube worms. The tube worms and the bacteria, by the way, are specially designed to turn toxic chemicals into organic molecules that this animal can absorb. Because remember, it doesn't eat them. So it has to have an entirely different kind of physiology. So does the bacteria. True symbiotic relationship. And I think God has a sense of humor, and so he made them red. Okay? This one, by the way, He really has a sense of humor, because this particular colony was found on the seamount near the Galapagos Islands. Everybody knows the significance of that, right? That's where Charles Darwin went on his journey with the beagle, on the beagle. We have some other things. We have the Hawaiian bobtail squid. It hunts for shrimp at night and buries itself in the sand during the day. It turns out, now this is what researchers say, the squid has developed specialized proteins in its belly. I don't think they developed at all. I think they were created and put there. But these special proteins reflect light given off by luminescent bacteria. So it has special organs on its belly called photocytes, and there are special bacteria that live inside of it. The reflected light camouflages the squid's shadow. So what you need to understand, if you're in the shallow water, the issue that puts you at risk is fish swimming above you see your shadow. They won't necessarily see the animal. The animal is the same color as the bottom, so it's pretty well camouflaged, but it'll see your shadow. And what's interesting is the shadow from moonlight is different than starlight, is different than sunlight. And so it turns out that this animal has the ability to adjust the luminosity of the bacteria that's in its photocytes along its belly, and it lights itself up in just the right way so that it no longer casts a shadow. So, there's this thing called bioluminescence, and it is a very complex process. You essentially need pigments and you need enzymes, and as a matter of fact, each of these individual bacteria on each of the species down there appear to need a custom designed enzyme. And so it would appear that for each one of these species that are down there, because the bobtail isn't the only one that can do this, when you get down into the ocean depths, 90% of animals have some method of producing luminescent light. But they're all slightly different. They're not all the same. It's not like there's one method and it was just copied across. They're all different. And so the issue here is their enzyme, which has the name of luciferase. Lucifer means bringer of light. So at the end of the day, that's the way secular science gets back at us, by the way. They name the enzymes that way. But the fact of the matter is, it would have to evolve 40 or 50 or 60 different times, because each enzyme is different. These animals that have this bioluminescence, and by the way, that's a sea slug. That's another one of our nudibranchs up there on the top. It's found down at depths of around 15,000 feet where there's virtually no light. And so the vast majority of these are down in this range where there's virtually no light but blue. And so these proteins are unlike anything that has been seen before in both their composition and behavior. So the proteins are now being ascribed intelligence. And this is a lady from the University of Hawaii, the research team. Now, we see hemoglobin used at these vents at the sea bottom, but that's not the means that God has to use. You've got the natural antifreeze that's in the Antarctic ice fish. It essentially has no hemoglobin. It has what amounts to ethanol or methanol in its veins. Literally as antifreeze, lives under the Antarctic Ocean. And so there's no reason that hemoglobin had to be in those tube worms. This is one of my favorite. I gotta wait for the thing to catch up to us this time. I'll see if I can do it without screwing it up. I still don't see it. I'm gonna wait for it a little bit. This is an octopus. What you're going to see is another video. It's at a site called TED.com. Definitely not believers. But we're going to see some unique capabilities that the Lord has built into octopus. That's right, the nudibranchs were worth another look anyway. I don't know why it's taking so long. Well, I can, just give me a second here. I'll play it for you right from the source.
Positively amazing. Here's two males fighting. Once again, they're smart, okay? Just an amazing thing. Here's an octopus. Sometimes they don't want to be seen when they move because predators can see them. And here's this guy actually can make himself look like a rock, and looking at his environment can actually slide across the bottom using the waves and the shadows so he can't be seen. He blends right into his motion blends right into the background. The moving rock trick.
Moving rock trick. The octopus speed never exceeded the speed of the waves or the sunlight. Have you ever stood and looked down in a shallow water? In the shallow water, and you notice how it looks like rocks are moving down there, and that's because the waves move and the reflection of the sunlight. I think what I did is drop my clicker, and so I wasn't going to have much luck. So what he's saying here is scientists have put cameras up above. This octopus apparently can change its movement so it counteracts the reflection of the light and the movement of the waves, so it looks like it's not moving. Now, I want you to think of the trigonometry problem of solving that problem. That's similar. That takes similar capabilities to what our troops in Iraq have. We have counter battery. Somebody sends a missile or an artillery shell at us. We have J-stars, we have satellites, we have other devices that immediately figure out, using reverse azimuth, using trigonometry, where did that come from? And within a minute, a square mile of the Earth is no longer habitable. Okay, it's just not. And so that's why you'll find enemies don't sit very long. They'll shoot one shell and move. Okay, that's what this octopus is doing. He apparently can look outside of himself and knows what other people can see and what the reflection is. Think about that. That's what they're saying. That evolved.
Or a cephalopod, you need to really understand how to use your surroundings to hide. In the next scene, you're going to see a nice coral bottom, and you'd see that an octopus would stand out very easily there if you couldn't use your camouflage, use your skin to change color and texture. Here's some algae in the foreground, and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Now, Roger spooked him, so as he took off, a cloud of ink, lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, "Look, I've been seen, best thing to do is get as big as I can get." That big brown makes his eye spot very big, so he's bluffing. Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color, watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3. And now he's gone, and so am I.
Well, this is a good time for this. One of Ken Ham's favorite sayings. It is unbelievable what an unbeliever has to believe in order to be an unbeliever. That octopus has to have so many characteristics and traits built into it. Where in the world would that evolve from? be able to shape time, its pattern. It actually makes physiological changes, not like a chameleon where it just changes the color of its skin. It changes the shape and style, etc. God speaks about the earth. Wow, that's a great one. Kind of cattywampus. But the Lord answers Job out of the whirlwind. He says, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Prepare yourself like a man. I will question you. You will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it?" That's the word out of Psalm 19. "To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" God has some questions for Job. This goes on for 4 chapters, by the way. And he asks an awful lot of questions about the creation. And it's kind of like, who are you to question what I've revealed about this? And so when I start with the plumb bob of Scripture, there are things we can't explain. But that's exactly what they are, the things we can't explain. It doesn't mean that we'll overturn Scripture so that our understanding aligns with some secular theory. Even if our gospel is veiled, it's veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded. We live in a culture that's driven by Satan, right? It's Satan's culture. And there is this blinding. And the gospel of Jesus Christ is something that people are to come to when they seek God, partly as a result of general revelation. We're supposed to be able to see the handiwork of God in what's been created around us, and that's supposed to cause us to seek after God. And certainly as Christians, it's supposed to be a platform to allow us to share special revelation. But when Christians give up Genesis and we're willing to agree with the secular world, it seems to me that we do ourselves a huge, huge disservice. Paul wrote and said, "Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust, avoiding the profane and babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge." Some versions actually translate that science, but it's gnosis. It's the Greek word knowledge. And look what he says. "By professing it, some have strayed concerning the faith." And this idea is that there are barriers that our culture gives. I heard Attorney General John Ashcroft explain the position of culture with respect to law. And I thought it was really one of the more insightful things I'd ever heard. The law is the lowest common denominator. And as Christians, we understand that, right? Grace replaced the law. The law is a low common denominator. But the purpose of culture is to affirm those things that align with the law and to stigmatize those things that are against the law. And the idea is we have a culture that's turned that exactly around, so that things that are evil are called good and things that are good are called evil. And so there are these natural barriers to the creation message. And these first 3 are, I'll call them the lazy man, right? There's ignorance. You are mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. We also have the natural man who does not receive the things of the Spirit of God. And you have attraction to fables. But you have these last 2. We have this willful ignorance, 1 Peter 3:18. And it says, 2 Peter, 3:5. And the context is that men willfully forget. And what do they forget? They forget the creation and they forget the flood. And so the summary of that verse is that God is long-suffering, right? He doesn't want any to perish. And then it talks about how long he's willing to wait, and it says a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day. That doesn't mean that we can take the Greek 1,000 years and apply it to the Hebrew day in Genesis. By the way, if a day is 1,000 years, and in Genesis 5, God says Adam lived to 930 years, and Adam is born on day 6, he never saw day 7. Okay? God's a better mathematician than that. And then we have the suppression of the truth. This is another illustration I use liberally from Ken Ham. And there's this idea that there's these 7 C's of history, right? We have creation, we have corruption, catastrophe, confusion, and then Christ and the cross. And we preach and expect people to believe in the historicity and the accuracy of the transmission about Christ and the cross, but we seem willing to throw away the history and the transmission of the truth on the first 4 C's. And the whole historicity and the application of the gospel of Christ rests on many of the truths in the Old Testament, in particular the truths in Genesis. And so we do ourselves great discredit in trying to share the gospel when we ignore those first 4 C's and don't take God at his word. He tells us to beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world. Basic principles there could be elementary particles. Basic principles means like letters of the alphabet. The basic things. Don't let them fool you by the basic things, tradition of men, rather not according to Christ. And now we get to the issue of wrath. So in Hosea 4, God shows us a picture of his wrath. He tells us that the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven, right, against all this suppression of the truth. In Hosea 4, in verse 1, he says, "There is no truth or mercy or knowledge of God in the land." Why is that? Well, we get down to verse 6, and you'll hear me quote this a lot, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge," right? But what's the rest of that? Because you have rejected knowledge. It's not because you didn't have it. It's because the knowledge I gave you, you rejected. And then you get, because you have forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children. And as we look at what happens when one generation starts to abandon the principles of Scripture, it really is the next generation that drifts even farther away. That's exactly what happens. And so when you get down to verse 16 and 17, God has 2 ways that his wrath is exhibited. And it's called the wrath of abandonment. And it's the kind of wrath that's discussed in Romans 1. He turns them over to depraved minds, right? Here, he says to Israel, who in this case represents believers, "Now the Lord will let them forage like lamb in open country." Well, what kind of defense does a lamb have in open country? Go over to Africa, if you get a chance, and there are things called impalas there, and they're everywhere. And fortunately, they propagate very fast. They need to. An adult impala can run at 50 miles an hour. When at speed, can bound 30 feet, can jump 9 feet high. And you know what they call them on the savannah? Lunch. It doesn't matter how strong you are, the gifts you're given. You cannot go out into the world without the armor of God. And if you abandon the word of God, if you reject the knowledge of God, he's going to leave you like lambs. The impala, wild dogs in Africa have a 90% kill rate. The worst kill rate is lions at 30%. I mean, they are lunch for everything on the savannah. And so the idea here is that you're going to be left like lambs. No shelters, no hedges, no shepherds, no chance. Okay? That's actually not as bad, because at least they're lambs. At least they're still called of God, right? Look what he says to Ephraim. Those are unbelievers. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let them alone. God turns them over entirely. And this is what happens when we reject the knowledge of God. He gives us the knowledge, and he says when we reject the knowledge, not only is he angry about it, but it turns out there will be no knowledge of God in the land, and our land will be turned over. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So what are those high things that exalt itself against the knowledge of God? Well, God says that general revelation is specifically given to us, that it might lead to special revelation. And our culture is designed to deny general revelation. Deny it. And so it makes it very, very difficult to share the gospel. How did Peter share the gospel in Acts, right? Peter started Christ crucified. Why? Because he was speaking to the Jews who already knew who God was. But when he gets to the Gentiles, he's on Mars Hill, and he starts speaking to them about the unknown God. And he starts with creation and the fact that God created and God ordained the places where men live, and God is in charge. So he starts with creation first. We can't give up the historicity and the veracity of God's account of what happened in Genesis without doing damage to the gospel as we try to share it with people in our culture. And that's even the example given to us in Acts. So what we are to do is bring every thought into captivity, the obedience of Christ. And again, it's Christ alone in creation, Christ alone in salvation, Christ alone in judgment. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. That which has already been and what is to be has already been. God requires an account of what is past. Thank you. Pretty much. Are there any questions? I know it wasn't that good. There have to be questions. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with that. You're not looking for me to disagree, are you? Yeah, in the back. No, I'm not. Actually, I guess I am familiar with it. Yeah, it does work for Ceres anyway, in the asteroid belt. Yeah, and Neptune, we're not sure why it doesn't work there, except it's really interesting. Neptune is the only planet that spins on its side. And by the way, if all of the planets came out of the same cloud, accretion cloud, why does Venus spin backwards? It does, literally, has retrograde motion according to the rest of the planets.